tensions are running high across the Taiwan Strait. The People's Liberation Army has been conducting military exercises targeted at Taiwan, and the U.S. Undersecretary of State made a trip to Taiwan, one of the most senior U.S. diplomats to visit since the termination of diplomatic ties between Taiwan and the United States in 1979. So, how will tensions unfold in the next few days? What's at stake for both sides, and how far will the U.S. go with Taiwan as it tries to contain China? To discuss these issues, I'm joined by Mr. Yang Xiyu, Senior Fellow from the China Institute of International Studies, Professor Zheng Youping from Taipei University, and Mr. Michael O'Hanlon, Senior Fellow with the Brookings Institution. This is our topic, and this is Dialogue. I'm Pan Deng. So, Mr. O'Hanlon, let's start with this question. How far will the U.S. or the Trump administration go as it tries to, or go with Taiwan as it tries to contain China?
Greetings. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. Second, I'm not sure I would use the word containment because, as you know, in English, that harkens back to memories of the Cold War and the way in which the West dealt with the Soviet Union. And even though we have a very tense relationship now with China, and I agree with you on that, I don't think it's like containment in any way, shape, or form, at least not now.
So what could be the word? Will you use the word provocation?
I think resistance, pushback, vigilance. These are the kinds of words that come to my mind. I'm not sure any one of them is perfect, but those are the ways I think about it.
So back to our question, how far will the Trump administration go?
I think they will continue, especially if Mr. Trump is reelected, they will continue to send officials of higher rank than have previously been allowed to visit Taiwan over a more frequent period of time. I think we can expect that. And certainly we can expect selected intensification of some of the economic competition and restrictions. Beyond that, I don't really think the United States is looking for any major new initiatives now. For example, we're already doing freedom of navigation exercises frequently in the South China Sea. The Senkaku dispute with Japan and China is, Senkaku Diaoyu dispute is sort of at a stalemate for the moment, and the United States has no interest in provoking anything there. And we certainly don't want to see a war between China and Taiwan. So I don't think the United States is going to be looking to create any big new initiative. It will watch and wait and see what China does next.
So having said that, are you confident that the United States will continue to honor the three communique, which serves as one of the pillars in Sino-U.S. relations?
Certainly, if Mr. Biden is elected, I would say yes. If Mr. Trump is reelected, I don't really know. Because, as you know, Mr. Trump is a very disruptive president, and sometimes he has already seemed to challenge the three no's, especially when he was first elected 4 years ago. And sometimes he likes drama. He at least likes to talk about challenging old ways of doing business. I don't predict anything, because usually Trump winds up being a little more cautious in his actual policy, but his rhetoric can be quite dramatic and quite provocative. And if he's reelected on a number of issues, I think we have to expect a further round of disruption from this administration.
So you just mentioned that the United States will not start some new initiatives regarding the issue of Taiwan, but you mentioned economic restrictions, something like that. So you believe that the overall status quo will remain unchanged. But what about the military arena? For example, the Trump administration is pushing the sale of 7 large packages of weapons to Taiwan. What about that?
Well, those are the sorts of things that we've seen for a long time in U.S.-Taiwan relations. And of course, we understand that those don't make China happy. But we also see a trend where China, of course, has dramatically improved its military. And the goal here is to help Taiwan have some initial defense capability so that China could never feel that it had a quick ability for a successful takeover. I think the kinds of weapons being sold in this package are mostly about resisting a Chinese attack. There is really no offensive firepower to speak of. These are primarily tactical, defensive munitions and that sort of thing that would be most relevant if China tried to invade Taiwan or tried to maintain a very tight blockade of Taiwan. And so I think in that regard, while yes, one would expect tension, I do not see this latest round of arms sales as representing a big new change in how the United States wants to help Taiwan prepare its military.
Professor Zheng, you are in Taipei and you've been observing the situation quite closely. Do you agree with what Mr. O'Hanlon just said? Do you believe that the United States is not trying to change the consensus established on the 3 communiques?
Well, likewise, I don't have a crystal ball in front of me to examine the history in the future. However, I will have to say that I will have to be on a different viewpoint with Mr. O'Hanlon because he seems to be too optimistic, or I will have to say that he's too conservative in estimating the potential political fallout or the impact resulting as a result of those 7 big ticket arms sales. First of all, those arms, technically speaking, they cannot be said to be of a strictly defensive nature. It has some a potential offensive application. The other thing is these arms sales and the political moves made by Donald Trump's administration does send a very strong political signal to the secessionist or the separatist movement in Taiwan, and including the Tsai Ing-wen administration. They're getting, perhaps from another angle, the wrong perspective, or the wrong signal. Because what I can see here, the DPP administration is very excited. They brag about it, and they're arguing, they're using their propaganda machine to tell the Taiwanese people, look, United States is strongly behind us. We can push forward. Don't worry about it. Even if there is any outbreak of military conflict, Uncle Sam, United States Army and Navy and Marines and the Air Force will come to our rescue. So I would have to say what Donald Trump is doing is that it's walking a tightrope, and that is very risky because the wrong signals can imply potential disaster in the future.
So having said that, are you implying that it may not be the United States to take a concrete step across the red line, but instead it will encourage the DPP in Taiwan to maybe eventually cross that red line to announce Taiwan independence?
Well, certainly, TPP is going to be more and more provocative, and it will begin to take some even bolder move toward de facto independence. I wouldn't say de jure independence. However, de facto independence is one thing for sure. The other thing is that for DPP, they are trying to de-link or decouple Taiwan's economy from mainland China. And from their perspective, they're thinking about reorganizing the value chain or the production chain and trying to join the so-called economic prosperity network with the United States at the helm. And I have to say that it's totally against the sense of the market logic. Entrepreneurs, businessmen cannot agree with DPP's administration's move to decouple Taiwan from mainland China economy. At the same time, any political move that is considered provocative, antagonistic, hostile would be bad for the cross-strait relationship. And that, in turn, could jeopardize business confidence in terms of investing, in terms of finance, and many other aspects. So I have to say that it takes two to tango. United States administration is playing the Taiwan card. Whether it's for the electoral concern or not, I'm not sure. However, the Taiwan card implication is very clear. And I have to say that it takes two to tango. Again, Tsai Ing-wen is more than willing to tango with American administration.
Gentlemen, we'll be getting back to you on this. You're watching Dialogue on CGTN. Stay with us. You're watching Dialogue on CGTN. We're talking about tension across the Taiwan Strait due to recent U.S. moves. Now, let's get the latest comments from the Chinese Foreign Ministry regarding the latest situation.
Their visits to Taiwan severely violate the One China principle and the provisions of the three China-U.S. joint communiques. Their move is a political provocation to China and encourages secessionists. Their action damages China-U.S. relations and stability in the Taiwan Strait. China opposes and condemns their actions and will take due countermeasures, including against certain individuals.
So, Mr. Yan, the spokesperson was obviously talking about recent two high-profile visits by senior U.S. officials, Secretary Azar and Undersecretary Crash, of course. So how will China respond to this?
Well, I think such two provocative actions violating the three communiques make a really serious challenge to Chinese sovereignty. That is the most serious challenge since 1979, when the normalized relation between the two. So China has to make a strong enough reaction to deal with the challenge. Number one, to send a signal to both Taipei and Washington. The red line of the One China principle cannot be violated, and the separation has no way. And then number two, make intensified drills close to actual combat to deal with the possible military conflicts triggered by the separation of Taiwan, supported or backed by the United States. So in short, China made strong reactions based on the worst scenario, but for the best results, say, peaceful unification.
Mr. O'Hanlon, what do you make of the Chinese Foreign Ministry's latest comments?
Well, it is traditional kind of back and forth on this issue. And by the way, I agree with my colleagues' concerns. I'm not predicting that this will be an easy path, and I'm not defending the Trump administration's every action. I think that the arms sales are somewhat understandable, at least some of them. I don't favor the high-level visits, just to be clear where I'm coming from. And nor do I favor President Xi making the statements that he really wants to hasten reunification. I think everyone needs to try to keep this thing where it's been. But the back and forth is predictable and it's traditional. And so anytime there is an arms sale, China will object. That would be true even if we did not see the problems in the relationship that involve high tech and TikTok and Huawei and tariffs and all the other economic disagreements that have intensified in the last few years. So I think some of this is almost ritualistic. And the question is, can we make sure that Taiwan doesn't go for independence, that China doesn't go for a forced reunification on a certain time schedule? Those have to remain the key goals, because no one has an interest in fighting over this. It would be terrible, not only for the region, but for the world, if we ever saw a war over Taiwan.
Professor Zheng, what's your take on this? And let's start with that detail. The Taiwan side said that PLA fighter jets have crossed the so-called midline of the Taiwan Strait several times, but from the latest comments, the Foreign Ministry made it very clear that there's no such thing called a midline in Taiwan Strait. What's your take on that?
Well, I have to say that if we look at the history, the so-called middle line was invented by an American general back in the 1950s, sometime around the Korean War period. Now, there is nothing that's legal or that's written down in black and white between, agreed upon between Taiwan and mainland China. So the so-called middle line is actually a political symbol used by the Taiwanese administration. Now, nowadays, you look at DPP administration, they are proclaiming that PLA fighters came across the middle line and used that as an indicator that China is a bully. China is threatening Taiwan. So that kind of rhetoric is for political propaganda. Let's put that aside. I have to say that some American, the China experts, like our distinguished guests in the United States, these are very senior China hands who knows both sides very well. But nowadays, I have to say that I'm very concerned about the younger generation of the so-called China hands or China experts inside the Donald Trump administration. You look at Trump administration's recent China policies and the actual measures put forth, they are very hawkish and sometimes very hostile. And I have to say, these are cooked up by some of the younger generation China hands or China experts inside the American Trump administration. And that's one thing that we have to be very careful. It is true that there are a lot of scholars and intellectuals and experts or strategic elites who are willing to push China and the United States toward a more friendly path. However, we're looking at people like Peter Navarro, people like some other officials, including the Secretary of State himself, who are really going for a Cold War mentality, even though I have to say it is true that we're not yet at a Cold War climate, but somehow there are tendencies indicating that some people inside the Trump administration or the White House is willing to push for that direction. And meanwhile, people here in Taiwan are concerned. We're divided here in Taiwan. One group in the blue camp are arguing that Tsai Ing-wen, you should take a rest. You should calm down. Don't push too far. Take a more cautious route. Whereas the secessionists, the separatists, they are having a ball. They're having a party because they think that the United States is actually implicitly encouraging Taiwan to go for a more provocative policy line. That is highly dangerous. And that's why we are here to discuss this issue, because it's obviously a very pressing concern.
Right, now let's get some sentiment from the online community, and we've taken some representative opinions from the online community, mainly from Twitter. So this is from Demas. The account says the U.S. has a long history meddling into other countries' internal affairs. They tried pawns such as Hong Kong, Taiwan and India to try and destabilize China. U.S. interfering into Ukraine to try and destabilize Russia. It is all about jealousy of China's rise. Mr. O'Hanlon, what's your take on this?
Well, I don't think you want to debate the Ukraine question right now, although I think the United States has been fairly restrained because, of course, we're not allies with Ukraine, and yet Russia attacked Ukraine, and there really isn't much doubt about that. It's a limited attack, but it's still an attack. So I won't really try to defend Russia in regard to this question. But in the more general issue of the United States' views of China's rise, I think there is concern. I don't know if it's jealousy, although there is some admiration for certain aspects of China's rise. Some of the infrastructure construction, for example, quite impressive and quite remarkable. Those of us who study China and have over many years still are, amazed by the economic progress and the number of Chinese who have now become middle class or better. That's all, to my mind, good news. And I use the word admiration more than jealousy. But you're right that there are also concerns that this combination of new power with President Xi's more assertive approach to foreign policy and with the concerns about, so-called American decline, although I don't share those interpretations myself, this all adds up to a dangerous situation where things are changing almost too fast in the Western Pacific for the state and the good of stability. And so I think that's the way I would phrase this. There is anxiety more than jealousy.
So talking about things changing fast, Ms. Yang, Do you agree that looking at the recent escalation in tensions across the Taiwan Straits and talking about military exercises, do you think it still falls into the so-called traditional back and forth, as Mr. O'Hanlon just mentioned?
Well, partly I agree with that. You know, if you look at the record or history of Taiwan issue between China and the U.S., really there's an up and downs pathway. But the latest round of escalation of the tensions really contains new elements. Basically two. Number one, U.S. has more intention and more interests in making Taiwan as a leverage to contain China's rising, because U.S. has been upset facing the continued rising of China without useful tools. But Taiwan is obviously a tool, useful tool they regard. And secondly, authorities in Taiwan really love to get the support from the U.S. So in short, the mutual useful between the two forged the new trend of the interactions between Taipei and Washington towards, for Beijing's concern, towards more obvious independence. So that is a really unique, dangerous. We've never seen. So that record us that, number one, the separation of Taiwan is the result of unfinished civil war. I need to say something.
So you mean that the unification of China cannot drag on forever?
No.
So what scenario will trigger a reunification bid, and also what kind of actions from the DPP or secessionist forces in Taiwan would trigger the anti-secession law?
Well, I think now the two risks are accumulating the possibility of military conflicts about Taiwan, about preventing Taiwan from independence. One risk is the gradually increasing official ties between U.S. and Taiwan, and finally make Taiwan and the relation between Taiwan and the U.S. as a so-called state-to-state relation. That will set a base for Taiwan's independence. And the second risk is U.S. has been trying to make Taiwan as a very tough hedgehog, so that if PLA really want to attack Taiwan for unification, it will take more time, cost more, and so on. So basically, the two risks conform a new tendency of independence, and the PLA has to prepare in the larger scale efforts.
So, Professor Zheng, what's the end game for the DPP here? Because I think it's quite clear to them that the mainland would not allow Taiwan independence, and they decided to go down this dangerous road at the cost of people in Taiwan, at their economic interest, at their well-being, and at their livelihood. For example, this American pork and beef issue has raised quite some opposition in Taiwan.
Well, the pork and beef issue, obviously, it's a quid pro quo. In other words, United States wants something concrete, the economic benefits. But Tsai Ing-wen administration would like to have some kind of a political gesture or protection from the United States government. And these two obviously matched. So it's a very sad scenario in which an administration who promises everything to the voters then decided to abandon whatever they supported before. Remember, DPP was strongly against the import of American pork with those harmful chemical agents. But now, today, they're telling you If you don't eat that much, it's not going to harm your health. So don't worry about it. We'll try to make sure that they would do the tagging clearly. We have to say that the Taiwanese DPP administration is now willing to give up a lot of the benefits, actual benefits that should be protecting Taiwanese people, in order to gain, in exchange for American protection. And in addition to buying these expensive military hardwares, they are also making the gestures.
Right, so let's expand the picture a little bit. Mr. O'Hanlon, do you think the United States have a geopolitical plan on further playing the Taiwan card?
No, I don't think there's a plan, because there's no good outcome. There really is no good place to go. If we ever had a conflict over Taiwan, I don't think either China or the United States would win. I think that the geography is such that both sides would lose. Even if there were not an escalation to general war, I don't think that China can really conquer Taiwan, and I don't think the United States can really protect Taiwan. So you wind up with an extended state of hostilities. So that scenario is very bad for everyone, and that's not going to change based on any trends in military modernization that I see. So therefore, I think the United States plan has to remain the traditional approach of accepting whatever the China and Taiwan governments can themselves agree to. And that would be,
well, thank you very much, Mr. O'Hanlon there, and Professor Zheng, also Mr. Yang Xiu in our studio. That's it for this edition of Dialogue on CGTN. I'm Pan Deng in Beijing. Bye-bye.